There is a napkin in the drawer of my workbench in the Marigny. I don't throw things away that matter. It's a habit from years of electrical work, where you keep the schematic even after the job is done, because there's always a moment later when you need to know exactly what you were thinking. The napkin is from Idle Hands on Magazine Street. It has a phone number on it in blue ink, written in the kind of handwriting that has made up its mind. No hesitation in the pen strokes, no second guessing. Underneath the number, also in blue ink, Peary. I found it on the bar the night she whispered the question that changed things. She had just called last call. The bar was emptying, the way bars do at the end of a night in New Orleans, slowly, with conversation still happening in doorways and one last round for the holdouts who couldn't quite decide to leave. I was one of the holdouts, not for the drink. I'd been nursing the same bourbon for 40 minutes. For the quiet, mostly. The particular New Orleans bar quiet of a Tuesday night when the tourists have gone and the neighborhood has settled back into itself, and the ceiling fans are doing their slow work overhead. She slid the napkin across the bar without looking directly at me. Then she leaned forward slightly, just enough that her voice was for me and nobody else in the room, and she said it. "Walk me home tonight." I looked at the napkin, then at her. She was already moving to wipe down the other end of the bar, as if she hadn't said anything, as if the question were now mine to decide about without the pressure of her watching. I put the napkin in my jacket pocket. I waited until the last customer left, and then I stood up and picked up my jacket, and she came out from behind the bar in her coat, and we walked out together into the September fog. That's how it started. That's how the story begins, with a napkin in a drawer and a woman who said a true thing without decoration and waited to see what I'd do with it. My name is Marcus Thibodeaux. I'm 35 years old. I grew up in the 7th Ward of New Orleans, and I've spent most of my adult life in this city, with one exception. I'm a marine electrician. I do electrical systems on boats and commercial vessels, installations, rewiring, troubleshooting on everything from small pleasure crafts to working shrimp boats. I've done work in the Gulf, on the river, up the coast. 4 years ago I was based in Houston, working with a commercial outfit that contracted to the offshore industry. Good work, steady pay, long days on the water. Then my father called. Emile Thibodeaux was 68 when he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He'd lived his whole life in the house on Ursulines Avenue where he'd raised my brother Ramai and me, a shotgun double that had survived 4 decades and several flooding events, and held its ground the way he held his ground, through stubbornness and good bones. When his symptoms started, he didn't tell either of us for 3 months. When he finally told Ramai, Ramai told me, and I drove to New Orleans the next weekend to see for myself. I came back to New Orleans permanently 6 weeks later. I'm not going to say what the next 3.5 years were. Not because they were secret or because I want to protect anything. They were what they were, and I'm not ashamed of any of it. But they were his years as much as mine, and the parts that would make a story out of them belong to him. What I'll say is that caregiving is a specific kind of work that you cannot prepare for by imagining it. You learn it by doing it, and the doing changes you in ways that take a long time to surface. You become very practical. You learn to read a room quickly, to anticipate what's needed before it's asked for, to manage your own feelings sideways rather than straight ahead, because straight ahead is rarely available. My father died 8 months before I walked into Idle Hands for the first time. The last weeks were hard. The months after were a different kind of hard, the kind where you're no longer needed in the specific way you've been needed for years, and the structure that held your days falls away, and you find yourself in your workshop at 7 in the morning with no particular reason to be anywhere, and an awareness, quiet but persistent, that you don't quite know who you are outside of the thing you've been doing. I worked. I took on more jobs than I needed, which is a version of the same pattern. I went for walks on the levee in the early morning before the city got loud. I cooked. I called Ramai on Sundays and we talked about Papa and sometimes just about the saints, and Ramai would do that thing he does where he asks a careful question to see if I'm okay without asking directly if I'm okay, and I would answer the question he asked, and we'd both know we'd really had the other conversation. I started going to Idle Hands because it was 2 blocks from my workshop, and because the bar had a quality I needed in those months. It was neighborhood, not scene. The regulars were people who had been coming there for years. The bartenders knew what you drank without you having to say. Nobody cared who you were or what you were going through. You could sit at the bar with a bourbon and be a person who was in the room without being the person you were thinking about. I went 3 times the week I first met Piri. The first 2 nights she was professional and warm in the way of a good bartender, attentive without being intrusive, conversational without pushing. The third night was a Tuesday and the bar was quiet and we talked for about 20 minutes total across the whole evening, in the scattered way of bar conversations, about the city and the work and a particular shrimp boat I'd once done a rewiring job on whose owner had the same last name as her grandmother. She called last call. She slid me the napkin. She asked me to walk her home. The walk was 9 blocks through the fog. New Orleans in September has a particular weight to it, the heat not quite broken, the humidity deep in everything, the streetlights haloed and the pavement slightly slick with the humidity that comes off the river at night. She walked with her hands in her coat pockets and her chin up the way of someone who has walked these streets alone at night for years and is entirely comfortable in them. I walked beside her, and we talked the way you talk when you've just done something that changed the frame of things, and you're both being careful not to go too fast. She told me she'd lived on the same block in the Marigny for 11 years. She had a dog named Beaulieu who had opinions about everyone. She'd grown up in Gently. She had a degree in English literature that she used primarily for having strong views about books and for reading the menus at restaurants the way other people couldn't. "What do you read into a menu?" I said. "How much they care," she said. "About the actual food versus the idea of the restaurant. A menu that uses 3 adjectives per dish doesn't trust the food. A menu that uses one trusts itself." "What's a good menu?" 4 items, she said. "Done well, no explanation." I thought about that. That's a philosophy. "It's a practical observation," she said, "applied to more than menus." I looked at her sidelong. She was watching the street ahead. "Why did you ask me to walk you home?" I said. A pause. She kept walking. "You've been in the bar 3 nights this week," she said. "You order the same thing and you stay about 2 hours and you don't talk much, but you also don't have the closed-off look. You have the other look." "What's the other look?" "Tired in a way that goes deeper than sleep would fix," she said. "But still paying attention, still there." I didn't say anything. "I meet a lot of people at that bar," she said. "Most of them are looking for something specific, company, distraction, a story to tell. You weren't looking for anything. You were just present. That's rarer than it sounds." "What were you looking for tonight?" I said. She was quiet for a moment. We passed under a streetlight and the fog caught the yellow light and she was briefly haloed by it. "Company I didn't have to perform for," she said. We turned onto her block. The street was narrower here, old houses closed together, the kind of architecture that looks like it was built by someone who understood that proximity wasn't the same as crowding. A cat watched us from a porch railing. Music came from somewhere behind a closed door, trumpet, quiet, searching. "How long have you been in the Marigny?" she asked. "I grew up in the 7th Ward," I said. "I've been back in the city 4 years. The Marigny is 2 blocks from the workshop." "What kind of work?" "Electrical. Marine mostly, boats, commercial vessels." She glanced at me. "That's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" She considered. "Someone who works with something that doesn't fight back," she said. "You have the patience for that." "Electricity fights back constantly," I said. She smiled at the sidewalk. "Maybe that's why it suits you." At her door she stopped and turned. The fog was thick now, the streetlights doing their full haloed work. Beaulieu could be heard from somewhere inside, a single low sound of acknowledgement. She said she was glad I'd stayed. I said I was glad she'd asked. She went inside and I walked home through the fog with my hands in my pockets and the napkin in my jacket and the feeling, tentative and careful, of something that might matter. I stopped at my workshop door and stood with my hand on the latch. The Marigny was quiet in the way it gets after midnight, not silent, never silent, but settled. Somewhere toward the river, a night bird was doing something complicated. I went inside. I put the napkin in the drawer of the workbench. I kept the things that mattered. That was already decided. The weeks after the walk built the way things build in New Orleans, at the pace of the city, which is not slow exactly but which does not hurry. The city has its own idea of time, and you either learn to move with it or you spend your energy pushing against it. I'd grown up here. I knew how to move with it. I went back to idle hands the following Thursday. Peary was behind the bar. She put my bourbon in front of me without being asked and said, "You came back." "I said I would," I said. "People say a lot of things," she said, and moved on to the next customer. She had a co-bartender named Cleo, sharp, observant, the kind of woman who had seen enough bar nights to read any situation accurately on arrival. Cleo looked at me when I came in and then looked at Peary, and then back at me with the expression of someone filing a piece of information they will not comment on yet. Over the next few weeks, Thursday became the night I went. Not always, twice, I had jobs that ran long. Once a hurricane watch that kept me in the workshop rigging emergency generators for a marina, but most Thursdays, and sometimes a Tuesday besides. The rhythm established itself the way rhythms do when two people are paying attention to each other without announcing it. We talked at the bar when she had a break in the work. About books. She'd been reading Zora Neale Hurston, which she said she kept returning to because Hurston understood New Orleans in a way that people who studied the city from the outside never did. About food, which was unavoidable in New Orleans and which she took seriously in the way of someone who had grown up eating food that required patience and care. About the work I was doing, a rewiring job on a shrimp boat in dry dock whose electrical system had been cobbled together by at least 4 different people over 30 years and was, she said when I described it, exactly like trying to edit a document that 10 people had touched without a style guide. "Is that what editing is?" I said. "That's what everything is," she said, "finding the original intention under all the accumulated decisions." I thought about my father's house on Ursulines Avenue, which I still owned, which I had not yet decided what to do with. The house that was his and that was built the way it was built for reasons that made sense to him, and that I understood because he'd explained them to me, finding the original intention. "My father died 8 months ago," I said. It came out more directly than I'd intended. She set down the glass she'd been drying. "Tell me about him," she said. Not "I'm sorry," not the package response, just "tell me." I told her about Emile, not the illness, the man, the way he played cards, the way he talked about music, the quality of his silence when he was thinking about something important, which was different from the quality of his silence when he was thinking about nothing, and which I had learned to read the way you learn the sounds of a boat engine, not consciously, just over time through attention. She listened the way she walked with her chin up, fully present, not filling the silences with comfort. "He sounds like someone who knew exactly who he was," she said when I finished. "He did," I said. That was the hardest part at the end, watching someone who knew exactly who they were become uncertain of it. She nodded. It was the nod of someone who understood something she hadn't experienced herself but was willing to carry. "What was he proud of?" she asked. I thought about it. "That his sons turned out decent," I said. He used that word specifically. Decent. He said it was harder to stay decent than to be smart or ambitious or successful, and it was the only thing he'd asked of us. Peary picked up the glass again and turned it in her hands. "He was right," she said. I looked at her. "You're decent," I said. She looked back at me. Something moved in her expression. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "I know you well enough," I said. She put the glass away. A couple at the end of the bar needed her. She went. When I left that night, she was still behind the bar, and she didn't say goodbye, just met my eyes as I went and gave me the small, unperformed nod that meant she'd registered my leaving and would register my return. I walked home through the Marigny feeling more like myself than I had in 8 months, maybe longer. The next Thursday, Cleo stopped me on my way to the stool. "She made a pie," Cleo said. I looked at her. "A pie. Pecan. She doesn't bake." Cleo kept her expression entirely neutral. "She made it last night. There was a piece wrapped up for you in the back refrigerator. I'm just informing you of that fact." "Cleo." "I'm not saying anything," Cleo said and went back to work. The pie was in a small container on the bar when I sat down. No note, no explanation. Peary didn't mention it. I ate it. It was excellent. "You made this," I said. She was pouring something for the table behind me. "My grandmother's recipe," she said without turning around. "It's very good." "I know," she said. "I just don't usually bother." She moved on to the next order. I finished the pie and thought about what Cleo had said she doesn't bake and about the particular quality of a person deciding to do something they don't usually bother to do, the intention behind it. I stopped in the kitchen doorway on my way out that night. She was doing something with the inventory clipboard. "Thank you for the pie," I said. She looked up. "I had pecans," she said. "Sure," I said. She held my eyes for a beat, not quite smiling, not quite not smiling. "Thursday," she said. A statement, not a question. My Thursday as an assumption. "Thursday," I said. On a Saturday she asked me to come by the porch. Not the bar, her apartment, the covered porch on the second floor that she'd mentioned a few times. She said the gardenias were going and I should smell them before they were gone, which was partly an invitation and partly just practical, the way she tended to be. I climbed the outside stairs, and she was on the porch in a loose shirt with Coffee and Bolu the dog, who assessed me from across the porch with the dignified suspicion of someone who has been through this kind of morning before. I sat in the other chair, and she gave me coffee, and we watched the street below without talking much while the gardenias did what gardenias do in New Orleans in September, releasing everything they had into the cooling air, extravagant and brief. "He's not sure about you yet," she said, "about Bolu." "I understand," I said. "He liked my last serious person right away," she said. "And that turned out to be wrong." I looked at the dog. "So suspicion is better. Suspicion is more honest," she said. The street below was the particular quiet of a New Orleans Saturday morning before 10, before the city remembered itself. A woman walked a small terrier, two men on bicycles, the smell of something being cooked somewhere nearby. "Tell me about the last serious person," I said. She considered whether to, then. "His name was Devereaux. He was a musician, good one. He was offered a residency in Amsterdam and he went. He asked me to come and I said no because," she looked at the street, "because I would have been leaving myself to go, not just the city, the version of me that makes sense here." "Do you regret it?" "No," she said. "I miss him sometimes, but I don't regret the choice." She picked up her coffee. "I regret that it cost me 2 years of not quite trusting anyone enough to ask." I sat with that. "Asking me to walk you home," I said. "That was the end of the 2 years." She looked at me sideways. "Or the beginning of the next thing," she said. Bolu came over and put his head on my knee. We both looked at him. "Progress," she said. "I stayed for 2 hours that Saturday." We talked about the city, the streets she knew by smell as much as sight, the restaurants that had survived decades and the ones that hadn't. She showed me the garden she kept in pots along the porch railing, basil and something she called iron plant because it wouldn't die, and a single gardenia in a clay pot that she said had been her grandmother's. "What happens to it in winter?" I said. "It sulks," she said. "Then it comes back." I looked at the pot, the plant in it, the particular stubbornness of something that had been tended across generations. "Like this city," I said. "Like everything worth keeping," she said. She looked at me when she said it, and neither of us said anything after that, but the porch held the weight of the conversation, and the coffee was good, and Bolu stayed where he was, his head on my knee, decided. Ramai found me on a Friday. He came into idle hands at 9, which was how I knew it was deliberate. Ramai didn't drink much and he didn't frequent bars, and he never came to Magazine Street unless he had a reason. He sat down 2 stools from me, ordered a beer he didn't want, and spent 20 minutes not saying the thing he'd come to say, while Peary worked the other end of the bar with the easy competence of someone who had seen this kind of arrival before and was giving it room. Eventually he said, "You look different." "Different how?" I said. "Like you're here," he said, "like you're actually in the room." "I've been in rooms, Marcus." He turned the beer glass in his hands. He was 2 years older than me and had our father's specific kind of patience. He could sit with a thing for as long as it needed before he said it. "You gave everything you had for 3.5 years. I watched you do it. And I know Papa needed it, and I know it was right, and I know you'd do it again." He stopped. "But you're not full yet. You're still," he struggled for the word, "you're still running on the last of what was left." I looked at my bourbon. "I'm okay, Ramai." "I know you're okay," he said. "That's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about you giving from empty." He glanced toward Peary at the far end of the bar, not unkindly, just honest. I need to know you're not going to disappear into something else before you've had any time to just be a person who doesn't have to hold anything up." He was quiet for a moment. The bar moved around us, the ordinary Thursday night sounds. When Papa got bad, Ramai said, quieter now, I came to see him every Sunday. You know that, but you were there every day. 7 days a week you were there. And I'd come on Sundays and I'd see you and you were yourself, but you were running yourself like a machine, like something that kept going because stopping wasn't an option. He set down the glass. I never said anything because it was right. He needed you, but when it was over, I kept waiting for you to, I don't know, decompress, come apart a little. Instead, you just got up and went back to the workshop. He looked at me. You've been awake for 4 years, Marcus. You're allowed to rest before I what? I said. Before you give yourself to someone new, he said. That's all I'm saying. The bar was warm around us. The ceiling fans turned. From the jukebox, something slow and local, the kind of New Orleans music that is sad and easy in equal measure. She's not a project, I said. She's not someone I'm holding up. I know that. He finally took a sip of the beer. I just wanted to say it out loud in case you needed to hear it. Hear what? He looked at me. That you're allowed to be Marcus again, not caregiving Marcus, not grieving Marcus, just Marcus, before you're anything to anybody else. I sat with that for a moment, then I said, she told me she asked me to walk her home because I had the look of someone tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix but still paying attention, still there. I looked at him. She didn't ask me to be anything other than what I was. She didn't need me to hold anything up. She asked me to walk 9 blocks in the fog. Ramai was quiet. I know what empty feels like, I said. This isn't it. He nodded slowly. He picked up his beer and finished it. He set the glass down. She good to you? He said. Yes, I said. Then I'm done, he said. Consider the speech given. He looked down the bar toward Peary, who was mixing something for a table order, her movements practiced and unhurried. Then he looked at me. Papa would have liked her, he said. That's all I'll say. He left me with that. I sat with the bourbon and with what he'd said, the whole of it, the worry and the permission both, and I let it land without pushing back against it. Been there every Sunday for 3.5 years. He'd watched from a different angle than I had, and what he'd seen from that angle was real. He wasn't wrong about the empty. He was wrong about how full I was becoming. Eventually, Peary came back down to my end of the bar and refilled my glass without being asked. Your brother, she said. Yes, I said. He's worried about you. He is. Is he right to be? I thought about it honestly. 8 months of levee walks, of early mornings in the workshop, of being a person who was finding their way back, of Thursdays, of a porch with gardenias and a dog who had moved from suspicion to tolerance to sitting on my foot. Not anymore, I said. She studied me. Then she went back to work. But when she passed by again a little while later, she let her hand rest briefly on the bar near mine, just for a moment, not a gesture for anyone else to see, just a small, deliberate acknowledgement. I felt it for the rest of the night. The second time she asked me to walk her home was in November. Not last call this time, she wasn't working. I'd come by the bar on a Wednesday evening to drop off a tool I'd borrowed from the building's owner, who kept a workshop space in the back, and she was there at a corner table with a book and a glass of wine, off the clock. She looked up when I came in. I dropped off the tool, said hello to Cleo, and was headed back to the door when I heard her behind me. Marcus. I turned. She had her book in one hand and her jacket over her arm. Her expression was the one I'd come to understand as Peary deciding something, not uncertain, just internal. Walk me home tonight. The bar was warm and full behind her. The street outside the window was November dark, a light rain starting, the kind that comes off the river in the evenings in fall. I could hear, faintly, the sound of a second line from somewhere toward the river, a trumpet bright and mournful and alive. I looked at her. Walk me home tonight, the same words, the same directness, the same refusal to dress it up into something it wasn't, but not the same question. The first time she'd been asking whether I was worth the risk of knowing, whether the person at the end of the bar was what she thought she'd seen or something else. This time she was asking me to stay, not just to walk 9 blocks. To walk toward whatever came next, with her, in the city that was hers and that had been mine since before I understood what it meant to be from a place. To keep coming back to the bar 2 blocks from my workshop. To keep climbing the outside stairs to the porch where Bolu had moved from tolerance to sitting next to my chair without being invited. To keep being Marcus, not caregiving Marcus, not grieving Marcus, just this version, the one who was finding out what he was made of when he wasn't holding anything up. Yes, I said. She came out from behind the table. She put on her coat. I held the door. We walked out into the November night. The rain was light, the kind that doesn't require an umbrella but touches everything, the streetlights doing their haloed thing in the river heavy air, the pavement dark and shining. The city made its sounds around us. The second line somewhere toward the river, a trumpet bright and mournful and alive, and somewhere behind it the steadier sound of the Mississippi carrying everything forward the way it always had, unhurried, certain of where it was going. She walked the way she always walked, hands in her coat pockets, chin up, unworried by the dark streets and the rain. I walked beside her and did not say anything because nothing needed to be said. The asking had been the whole of it. The yes was the whole of the answer. At her door she turned and looked at me the way she had the first night, direct, honest, nothing performed. "Come up," she said. "Bolu wants to meet you properly." "He's met me 4 times," I said. "Formally," she said. "On the porch, in the rain, when there's no agenda, that's when he decides for good." We went up. Bolu was on the covered porch in the November cool, watching the rain fall on the street below with the satisfied dignity of a dog who has arranged things exactly as he wanted them. He looked at me. I sat in the chair beside Peary's and he came over without being called and sat on my foot, which she had explained was the final verdict. She made coffee. I sat on the porch with the dog and the rain and the city below in its light and noise and perpetual insistence on being exactly what it was, and she came out with 2 cups and sat in her chair and pulled her feet up, and we were quiet for a while in the way of people who no longer need to fill silence. "Cleo told me," she said after a while, "that your brother came in. He came to check on me," I said. "Was he right to?" I thought about it the way she'd asked, straight on, no evasion. 8 months of levee walks and early mornings in the workshop, 3.5 years of being the person who held things up, the particular tired that her eyes had seen at the bar before I'd said a word. "He was right about what I'd been," I said. "He wasn't right about what I am now." She nodded. She was watching the rain. "My grandmother used to say New Orleans does one thing better than anywhere else," she said. "She said it knows how to let people come back. The city doesn't ask what you were. It asks what you're doing now." I looked at the street below, the rain making it shine. My father's house was 6 blocks north of here. The workshop was 2 blocks east. The levee was 3 blocks west, and in the early mornings before the city woke, I'd been walking it for 8 months, watching the river and figuring out what came next. What came next was this. It had been this, building toward it for 2 months. "What are you doing now?" she said, looking at me. "Sitting on your porch in the rain," I said. "Watching your dog decide about me." She smiled. The full one, unguarded, the same one I'd first seen when she looked up from the napkin she'd written her number on and found me still at the bar. "Good answer," she said. I stayed that night. I had coffee and I talked to her until past midnight, and then I walked home through the Marigny with my hands in my pockets and the sound of the city around me and something in my chest that I recognized, finally, as simply being glad. Not grateful, not relieved, glad. The specific gladness of someone who has been somewhere dark and narrow for a long time and has come back into a room with light in it, and people who are glad you're there. In the workshop the next morning, I opened the drawer where I kept the schematics and the small things that mattered, and I looked at the napkin in its corner. The blue ink. The handwriting that had made up its mind. The number and the name and the question written underneath in 2 words that had been the same question twice and meant something larger both times. Ramai came for dinner on Sunday and met her for the first time. He shook her hand and then looked at me with the expression of a man who had said his piece and been answered and was satisfied. After dinner, in the kitchen, he said, "Papa would have liked her." He'd said it before. It landed the same way both times. She came with me one morning in December to walk the levee. I told her about the walks, the early mornings, the river, the way the city looked from the top of the levee before it woke up, and she'd said she'd never done it, which surprised me, given how long she'd lived here. She put on her coat and her boots, and we walked up to the levee in the dark before dawn and stood at the top as the river came into view and the city lay behind us still sleeping. She looked at the river for a long time without saying anything. Then, "I've been in this city my whole life," she said. "I never thought to come up here." "You have to be awake early," I said, "or you have to have a reason." She looked at me. "Which one brought you?" "Both," I said, "and now you." She took my hand. We watched the river carry the night toward the gulf. The napkin is still in the drawer. I keep the things that matter. Walk me home tonight. She'd asked it once on a September night with fog on the streets and a bar at her back, and 2 years of not quite trusting anyone behind her. She'd asked it again on a November night with rain coming off the river and Bolu waiting on the porch and something settled between us that hadn't been there in September. Both times I'd said yes. Every morning since, in the quiet way the good things ask, I kept saying it. Yes. Yes.